want to start. Thank you for taking a minute out today. It's great to
Sure.
meet you. I appreciate you taking a minute.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You bet. So before we get into your new music, I want to know first and foremost, 5 years ago, this COVID thing was really raging and going
Hmm.
into different directions.
Yeah.
How much of living through that time period has influenced the way that you do music and do things today?
Wow. There was that is an interesting question because there were so many different aspects to that.
Yeah.
One was just like, uh, all of a sudden, I've been since 2003, I've been teaching composition and piano and stuff at NYU. So that was the first thing to go. All of a sudden, the whole, uh, all our teaching gigs got canceled, and the first thing that happened was we all discovered Zoom, and and we went on Zoom talking, and I did teaching. So that really changed a lot about the way that I teach and teach music and interact with students. And we were also grateful when that ended and I could actually get back into the classroom, and it kind of like, wow, completely changed my perspective now on teaching live. It's
Yeah.
like and the first thing you notice was, wow, you're really grateful that that happened. But it did keep everybody together, you know.
Certainly did.
And a lot of businesses fell because of that. Things like we were playing rather, not frequently, but often at the Blue Note, for instance, and that closed down, and nothing was happening there for quite a while. And then when they finally got back into business, their whole system had changed, and we haven't played there since because they had to change their format to accommodate post-pandemic restrictions and things like that. And I think a lot of clubs did that too. And and so it changed a lot of ways
Yeah.
to do that. But I'll tell you what, one thing, it sure solidified the community.
Yeah. That is for sure.
And I bet that happened in just about every city around the world, that was done that. It was and I mean, it was similar for us because that was the very same thing that happened during 9/11. It's like, but whole city came together, and it was pretty amazing. And it changed everything. So those were two events that were, all things considered, fairly close
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
in history. So big changes.
So, speaking of loss and regaining your latest project, which is wonderful, Requiem for the Lost,
Mm.
talk to me a little bit about this project. How did it come about?
It came about, I was working it's actually working with my publicist and we were talking about just and she just asked me, says, do you ever write things about um, events or things like that? And most of my music that I tend to write, I don't start from an idea or some kind of like writing about there's a lovely flower, I'm going to write about it, or write about a scene. I often, in fact, write the piece, and then I often struggle to find a name for it. Like, oh, okay, what does this sound like though? So this was a little bit different. I actually, we were both just talking about some of the current things that were happening, and we had both mentioned the fact that we were interested in the whole um, uh, dire wolf controversy that was coming out. And not only was it just like this, the dire wolf, but it was about de-extinction. So this kind of a new word that has entered our vocabulary here these days, de-extinction. And it's I mean it's I mean, I hate to say this, but it's science fiction, but in the best sense of the word, because it's based on science,
Yeah.
and I think, but it is also, you have to make the comparisons to fiction that already exists. Of course, the one thing that everybody goes to is Jurassic Park, where you're cloning dinosaurs and it's a disaster and stuff like that. And this one had a little bit of it's this is a little bit more on the fluffier side because it's about, dogs and essentially wolves and from it's also very featured on the Game of Thrones, and all of the kids in the Stark family have dire wolves as pets. So here's the dire wolf that comes across as this, kind of cool, fluffy, like little pet thing. So sure, why not clone it and have some new friendly dogs on the planet? But it was just a fascinating subject to think about how they're trying to recreate, these wolves that have been extinct for thousands of years. Um, and there's so many different things that come with that as well. It's like, okay, yeah, well, wow, that sounds like a great idea. How fantastic is that? You're going to clone some new animals and we haven't seen them in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And then the other question one has to ask just right on the very backside of that is like, well, they went extinct for a reason. Extinction has a way of doing that. It's extinction is just not a thing that happens over time and says, "Oh yes, let's pick you, let's pick you." There's always some kind of reason for that, and
Yeah.
it's you kind of got to balance the two things and wonder why.
Yeah.
And so this new word, de-extinction, is like, well, let's things just don't de-extinct. They have to have help from, and uh, I believe they have to help from the Terrans here, us Earthlings, to
Yeah.
make it happen. And so there's this company called what is it called? The Colossal Biotech or something, who are these people who took the de took the uh, they found I think it was 14 different DNA or genes or something and cloned them, spliced them into essentially I think into gray wolves and I don't know the exact science about the whole thing, but they claimed that that was enough to be able to um, definitely call these things like dire wolves.
Yeah.
Currently, of course, there's been a huge backlash against that. A bunch of other scientists and all these different systems saying, no, we don't believe you have enough material. These are dire wolves. So right now, it's in a kind of limbo about is it a dire wolf or is it not? But it certainly stimulates the imagination. So I said, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good material here. So I actually sat down a little bit at the piano and said, well, what can I say about that musically? What does that say to me? And what can I bring about that makes it happen? And so I wrote a short piece,
Yeah.
and yeah, it came out pretty good, and I thought it was, and it's Requiem for the Lost, so the piece has some, melancholy in it, some sadness, and maybe also some hope and some kind of like a fantastic kind of um, perspective of perspective of the whole issue.
So is that how your creative process kind of works? You just kind of is this a new hybrid of what you do with having an idea like this? How do you usually go about the process?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said before, usually I just write music, like here it's one of my here's a great quote. This is one of my favorite quotes by a composer. Famous composer was asked, what is your process for creating music? And he says, well, I sit at my piano and I begin to improvise, and once I've captured an idea then I begin to apply all the aesthetics of good musical technique to that idea. Well, this was Joseph Haydn speaking about 400 years ago.
Yeah.
And, and I went, no kidding. Well, gee, that's how I compose too. And I thought, well, okay, I'm on the right track. There's a precedent for all that. And so a lot of composers, I think, have probably work in that same way. Although composers are like, snowflakes. There's no two alike,
Yeah.
and same with songs. So it's different for me to actually grab a subject matter. But there is some precedent before this. I play in this group here that we're all on the faculty of NYU, but we formed a group called Combo Nouveau. And one of the pieces I wrote of it is called the One World Suite, which is this suite that is about the status of our planet, and it takes issues such as global warming and all that. And but my approach to it, it's a seven-part suite. My approach to it is one of not like, oh, disaster, here we go, and this is all the things that are screwed up. But my approach to it is like, oh, I'm going to write about everything that I find beautiful about the planet and and put that out there and say, okay, this is what I love about the planet, and and it gives it a perspective of hope. You know, the other day I was standing out. I'm up here at the confluence of the Hudson and the Harlem rivers,
Yeah.
and I thought, oh well, this is kind of cool. And I was doing a little video on something on inspiration, you know. And I put it online. I said, well, I can't just leave it there. So I wrote a piece called The Confluence, which is about the Hudson and Harlem rivers.
Yeah.
And it's you can see it. It's on my Facebook page. It's just short. I just kind of started it, but I wrote it for full orchestra, and I said, okay,
Yeah.
so you can take many different kind of approaches to how one starts a piece. You can have something to work with. You can just choose to write pure music. I think the idea, of course, in the end is that you want to write something that is somewhat transcendent, whether you're working on the Hudson and Harlem rivers or the status of the earth or the fantastic idea of de-extinction and the dire wolf.
So how did this journey begin for you? How did you get into the music? How did you get fascinated? How has it evolved into this career of both composing and teaching?
Well, to like anything, it just didn't fall out of a tree. I've
Right.
been I've been doing it since year. I mean, from the minute I heard, I grew up in Southern California, in Long Beach, California, back in the 60s. And tremendous musical scene happening in the 60s, probably even more in the 70s. Um, and we were exposed to every kind of music that you could possibly, hear. We had the Los Angeles Philharmonic was available to us. We had bands, we had jazz bands, we had rock bands, everything, and all the radio stations played everything. And I just ate it up, and I heard everything. So I had kind of a comprehensive view about music growing up. And in LA, the Beach Boys and surf music was like, really happening. And then not too long after that, the British invasion happened and the Beatles hit. And man, I was off and running. And I said, that's it. I have to have a guitar. My parents, who were pretty smart this way, they bought me a guitar and guitar lessons at the same time. And that, I could have been just another kid in a garage band, and playing three chords. Hey, I got my three chord. But they bought me guitar lessons and I learned how to read music. And I think that was an essential element. And I went along, I started playing other instruments and piano. And then my mother rented a piano and I started to play piano. And when I was 14 or 15, I was playing in a band just that had a tenor sax and a trombone and a drummer. I was playing bass, I think a guitar. And I had this song running through my head. And I played trombone, so I said, "Oh, I know how to write for the trombone," and I figured out how to transpose for the tenor sax on my own. And I wrote the whole thing down on some scrap paper, and I gave it to the guys. And they were a little bit older than me, and they said, "Wow, this is great." I don't remember the song except it was in D minor. And I realized, wow, I can impress the big kids.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where it started. And I said, I like this writing thing.
Yeah.
So, and then I just continued to write for larger groups, probably along the way. I lived in Orlando, Florida for 10 years, and I wrote for stuff around there. Uh, I wrote for a lot of groups at Disney and in the park and then I moved to New York and I had my own big band here in New York when I moved here in 1985. 1984, yeah, 1985. And man, I was off and running. And because not only was I in New York, but it supplied me with, this multitude of absolutely incredible musicians. And so, I was inspired every day to write and continually write new stuff and write better. And I was very blessed in that fact that the guys liked my music, and I always had great bands to record.
S-
And then,
Oh no, go ahead. You're good.
well, and then later on, I was selected as the musical director for the Umo Jazz Orchestra in Helsinki, Finland. And so I moved there for almost a couple of years and put on to a lot of great concerts and had great guests and stuff. Came back to New York, started doing some teaching and branched out. And NYU had been great. My musical partner and friend Dave Schroeder was the head of the division at the time, and we would just put together concerts with great guest artists to come in and play with kids. And I was always writing new pieces for that. So it's been a pretty amazing thing. And along the way, I'm also writing for orchestras and chamber groups and symphonies now as well.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, colleagues, everyone that listens to your music, everyone around you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Right now, I'm Rich Shemaria, composer.
Right on.
And that covers a lot of ground,
Yeah.
you know.
So if anyone wants to pick up this new work, and before you say that, I'm curious, what are you hoping the listener gets from this new piece?
It's the same thing as any piece of art. It's like you put it out there and remember, all art is pretty much abstract, you
Yeah.
know. Music probably the most abstract because it's not a visual art. It's something that we pick up with our ears. So it doesn't we actually can't see it. It doesn't kind of floats in
Yeah.
around us. And so I have always been a big fan of the fact that I'm hoping that when I put my music out there, everybody interprets it in their own way,
Yeah.
what it means to them, because it's being so abstract. I think that's the essential element of music is that it can be interpreted in many different ways, and how even if you say, okay, this is about the dire wolf and it's cloning and de-extinction and stuff like that. Okay, some people may start with that and they say, oh, okay. And then as they listen to the song, they develop, it may touch them in other ways that they hadn't planned. It may, remind them of something from their past or something that they've been thinking about even. Or it could remind them of, I don't know, maybe it reminds them of one of their own pets or one of their own animals or something. But I think that's the most important thing for me is that I want everybody to just hear it and interpret it in their own way.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to listen to it, what's the best way? Where's the best place?
Well, we're going to be putting it. I have a shorter version. I have these little snippets and short versions up already up on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. My publicist has seen to that. She's really good. She gets it out there, and you can also. I'm going to be putting it up on my website, which is not surprisingly richshemaria.com.
Okay.
And I'll have the expanded version. It's about 3.5 minutes long, and for almost full orchestra.
Okay. And I will put links up in the show notes. Rich, this has been wonderful, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your story, and best of luck.
Great, Joe. Thank you, and it's a pleasure being on your show.
Yeah, thank you.
Jazz fans, Joe Domino here, the host of the weekly Neon Jazz radio show and regular interview series being produced and distributed from Lee Summit, Missouri. We are very excited to let you know about the second annual Lee Summit Jazz Festival taking place again this summer on June 28th at the Bridge Space, located at 210 Southwest Market Street in downtown Lee Summit. Following the success of the 2024 festival, the lineup will include Lee Summit students, Casey Area Youth Jazz, Paganova with Michael Pagan, Horoscope with Stan Kessler, Brad Gregory, Adam Larson, and the Lee Summit Jazz Orchestra. There will also be food trucks and vendors to round out a day of celebration. Early bird tickets are 2 for $30, and all details can be found at lsjazzfest.com. We can't wait to see you there.